Okay, we are in 25b, Chafei Amud Beis. We left off yesterday with the position of Rabbi Nachman, who told us that a woman who cannot bear children from birth, meaning she was born with some sort of condition that doesn't allow her to give birth, then she doesn't qualify as a Sotah. And the reason is because the verse states at the end that if she drinks and she's innocent, then Nizra Zera, she will produce seed or seed offspring. Some way to translate it like that. So Rabbi Nachman understands that to mean not just a blessing, but also a qualifier. That who qualifies as a Sotah? One who by nature does produce seed, does produce offspring. And therefore, a woman who from birth does not produce offspring doesn't qualify as a Sotah. This is Rabbi Nachman's position. As for our Mishnah, which they said dispute, right? Our Mishnah raised a dispute. Said, one view was she could be a Sotah because the husband can marry someone else to have children. He can fulfill his obligation with someone else, and therefore she qualifies as a Sotah. The other says, nope, there's an issue with their marriage, and therefore she shouldn't qualify as a Sotah. Said Rav Nachman, that dispute in our Mishnah is only with respect to a woman who was once capable of giving birth, but now can't, either because now she's older or because she met some illness or some sort of condition happened to her later in life. But Rav Nachman states, if the woman is born with a condition that doesn't allow her to have children, then doesn't qualify as a Sotah. This was Rav Nachman's position. Now, as I said yesterday, what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce a Tosefta, which again is a Mishnaic age text, which didn't make the final cut of the Mishnah. It's a more elaborate version of our Mishnah discussion. And that text is going to explicitly state that an islandess, a woman born with a condition that doesn't allow her to give birth, or born with a condition of infertility, then she too might qualify as a Sotah. And thus, this is going to be a dispute, a refutation to Rav Nachman. So this is 1, 2, 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Meisvei. I've discussed here a number of times that the manner in which the Gemara introduces a question indicates for us what kind of question it's going to be. Right? We talked about this word bayi, which means an inquiry. That is, the questioner doesn't have any agenda, just inquiring as to the law of some sort of case. And another way of introducing a question is meisvei. And meisvei is always going to be a challenge, which means the questioner has an agenda. The questioner disagrees with the original proposition and is now raising a argument to refute that position and thus supporting their own position. Right? In the parlance of the Torah literature, it would be the makshin, meaning the one who's asking the question. Is to say the person asking the question has an opinion, and the question is to support that opinion. Now, there are different ways in which you can raise a challenge. Sometimes you can raise a challenge to a position by logical deduction, use some sort of rationale to challenge the original position and thus state your own. Such a question would be introduced with the word maskif or matkif, with the Sephardic pronunciation. Meitvei or meisvei means that the questioner is going to cite to a source text that is of primary importance than the one speaking. So say, if we're speaking about a Mishnah, we might say meisvei, quoting a verse being a primary text to a Mishnah. In our case, Rav Nachman is a sage of the Gemara's era, and meisvei, we're going to introduce a text which is more primary than Rav Nachman, namely a text from the Mishnaic era. So whenever you see the word meisvei, you know that's what's happening. There's a questioner who has an agenda, who's going to cite to a source greater than the original proposition to refute the proposition and thus state their own claim. That's what's happening now. So this text that we're going to read It's quite lengthy, quite detailed. It's an elaborate version of our Mishnah. But again, this whole thing's only introduced to that one line, that one word actually, which states that even a woman who's born with infidelity also can qualify as a Sotah. So let's see. So here is this place after this, a more elaborate version of our Mishnah. Hamakana la'arusasai, one who issues a warning to his betrothed woman, right? We discussed this in the Mishnah. The betrothed woman is after she received the ring, but haven't gone to a chuppah yet. Today, we do both together. We do the ring under the chuppah, and then we go right into the blessings of the chuppah and the yichud room, the husband and wife secluding, and then they move in together. But in ancient times, and theoretically, you can separate between the ring and the chuppah by a year. Sometimes they would do that. They would get a ring, spend the year saving up to buy a home, to prepare for the wedding, and then the wedding happened a year later. Okay, so during the interim, in between the ring, the betrothal, and the chuppah, the husband or the fiancé warns his intended. And likewise, a person whose brother passed, leaving a widow childless. So we discussed, he is shemeres yavam, he's waiting to consummate the marriage with his sister-in-law, with his deceased brother's widow, which again, it's his intended, but they haven't yet fully married yet. So either of these two cases, if he warned his wife against, he warned his intended against secluding herself with a certain person, im ad shaloi kansa nistra, if she secluded herself before they closed their marriage. So they're in this interim state, whichever version, either betrothed or waiting to close the marriage between himself and his deceased brother's wife. In either of those cases, he warns her against secluding against a particular person. She secludes herself, but she did so before they closed the marriage. So they're still not fully a couple yet. So lo shaisa, she cannot drink the Sotah waters, because as we learned in our Mishnah a number of times, that in order to drink from the Sotah water, we have to qualify as fully married. We went through the verses to discuss this at length, whether it qualifies as fully married, not fully married. But according to this version, they must be completely fully married before she can drink the Sotah water. And in this case, they're only intended to marry, not fully married. But simultaneously, she cannot collect the ketubah. The ketubah of the one who is a widow, she still has the right to the ketubah of her deceased husband. That will roll into her new marriage with the new brother, with the second brother. The intended, the one who received the ring, the ketubah is done then, even though they haven't gone to the chuppah yet. But because she behaved in such a way that was grounds for serious suspicion, he warns her against secluding herself with a particular person because of an inappropriate relationship. And now she secluded herself, so she loses her ketubah. This is all not news to us. This is kind of an elaborate version of our Mishnah, as I mentioned. Okay, top of page 26a, Vav Amid Aleph. Muberes chaveroi, a woman who is pregnant from a previous marriage. Umenikas chaveroi, or a woman who is still weaning a child from a previous marriage. So we discussed this as well. By Torah law, a woman who is divorced may not get married until her child is 2 years old, right? So, I mean, obviously, if she's divorced and her children are already older, then she can get married, right? She has to wait 3 months, actually, and then get married. Likewise, if she's divorced childless, she can wait 3 months and get married. But if she's divorced while she's pregnant, or divorced soon after they give birth, or she gives birth, our sages instituted to protect the child and to make sure that the child has her mother's attention until the child is 2. She may not get remarried until the child is 2 years old. So in this case, she violated that instruction of our sages, and she did marry. So she did remarry. So she's married to a man, but she's pregnant from a previous marriage, or she's married to a man and she has a 3-month-old from a previous marriage. So our sages would encourage them to separate and then remarry once the child is 2 if they want to. But at the moment, this marriage is looked at askance by Torah law. So does this count as a qualifying couple in which she qualifies as a Sotah? We discussed this already yesterday and the day before. So again, the law is loy shoy, she doesn't drink the Sotah water because she's not, she's married, but her marriage isn't sanctioned by rabbinic law, and therefore she cannot qualify to drink the Sotah waters. But loy noitles ksuba, she loses her ketubah because, again, she behaved in a suspicious manner. This is Rabbi Meir's view. Now, this we knew from the Mishnah. We already knew from our Mishnah there's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and the sages. Rabbi Meir is of the view that because Torah says you guys shouldn't be married, therefore she cannot drink the Sotah water. And the sages said, well, in theory, they can divorce and remarry, which means we're not totally against their relationship. They could get remarried later. So the sages therefore said, you do qualify as a Sotah. It's a good enough marriage, even though the sages say you shouldn't get married, you shouldn't be married now, but it's not a totally wrong relationship because we're going to be okay with it in a couple of months, in a year, or 2 years. Right? That we knew already from our Mishnah. But now this Tosefta, this text, adds more details to this dispute. As follows. Shahayi Rab Meir Omer. Rab Meir would say, in explaining his position, as to why this woman who's pregnant from a previous marriage, or who has a child under 2 from a previous marriage, doesn't qualify as a Sotah, because he would say, La yisa adam uberes chavere. A woman may not, a person should not marry a woman who's pregnant from a previous marriage. Umenikes chavere. And a person should not marry a woman who is weaning a child from a previous marriage, right? A child under 2 years old. Now, here's the kicker. Rabbi Meir is of the view, and this is an addition we did not know yet. Vim nasa, if he did go ahead and marry a woman that he wasn't supposed to, he married this woman who's pregnant from a previous marriage. He married this woman who has a child under 2 from a previous marriage. Yoitzi, they should divorce. And the mayor adds, Veloy Yachzer Elamis, and they should never get remarried. So this is a new detail. It isn't only, the dispute is not only whether a marriage is going to be okay later, but now is not okay, does she qualify as a Sotah? Rabbi Meir would say in that case, well, maybe she does qualify as a Sotah. But the reason why I'm telling you that this woman, a man who married a woman who's pregnant from a previous marriage or has a child weaning from a previous marriage, the reason why I say she doesn't qualify as a Sotah is because she actually should divorce and they should never get remarried. It's like a punishment almost. It's like a deterrent. It's a deterrent. Rephrase that. The sages wanted to protect this child so much. Not only did they say that you shouldn't get married, but they said that if you do get married, we're going to undo that marriage and you will never be able to marry each other again. And that way, a woman will really think 3 times before she marries with a child from a previous marriage. And thus, in this way, protecting that child more to have her mother available for the first 2 years of their life. So, and that's why our mayor says they're disqualifies a Sotah. So it's a layer deeper than what we had so far. So we see already how this Tosefta is elaborating on our Mishnah. And you want to say something?
Yeah, just to try to see an overarching principle here.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because in Rabbi Meir's view, and probably in concurrence with the rabbis, is that this is not deemed a correctable marriage.
That's right.
And if it's not a correctable marriage, then the sage's argument falls apart.
That's right. That's right.
Because they're arguing that if it's correctable, then she's like,
that's right.
She's okay. She can divorce it, so therefore
that's
she
right.
should be able to drink.
Correct. So the sages are the view, as we're going to see in a moment, that the marriage is not correct now, but it's correctable. It's a good word. But the mayors of the view, no, this is not a correctable marriage. The sages are so keen on protecting that 2-year-old child that we're going to impose divorce and never remarry again. Incorrectable. And because it's an incorrectable marriage, she doesn't qualify as a Sotah. Right? Whereas, to your point, the sages say, now Yotzi, a woman or a person that gets married to a woman who has a child from a previous marriage, Yotzi, they should indeed divorce, but when it comes time that she's allowed to remarry, the child's 2 years old, let her remarried. So the sages are the view that this is a correctable marriage. And because it's a correctable marriage, therefore she qualifies as a Sotah now, even though she shouldn't be married. But the mayors of the view, this is an incorrectable marriage. He takes the protection of the child all the way to the extreme. So this is one of those cases where you have to balance sensitivities, right? You want to be sensitive to the couple. About this poor woman who went through a divorce or lost her husband while she has a little baby. She really needs the company of another man. Maybe she needs the support of another man. And that's why she's getting married. So the sages say, okay, look, we have to balance her protection, the child's protection. Okay, divorce, but we'll let you come back to him later because you need that support. But the mayors of the view, no, we have to go all the way protecting the child all the way. And therefore, if we allow them to remarry later, they're just going to throw out the whole law. So we have to protect the child all the way. And if you violate this rule, you can never marry that guy. So you want the support of that guy? Good. So wait 2 years so that you can give your child support. It's like a balance between these two sensitivities. Okay. So this Tosefta continues. V'harova, I think this is the correct reading. Rashi translates Rova as a young man, a bacher, a young single man. Shenasa, who married Akara, a woman who can't give birth. Now, this woman who suffers from infertility, Akara, is a woman who later in life got some condition that rendered her infertile. So this young man, he never fulfilled the mitzvah of having children yet. And he's marrying a woman who can't have children. But again, she was capable of having children. Now she's not. Vizikena. And he married an old woman, a woman after menopause, who cannot have children. Again, she was capable of having children, now can't. The Einla Isho Banim, Meikara. And his young man, who had never been married before, or maybe he was, but actually, no, he'd never married before, and therefore has no other wife and doesn't have any children. So he never fulfilled his obligation to have children, and to begin with, enters a relationship which cannot produce children, knowingly, presumably knowing that she can't have children. Certainly in the case of a woman who's older, he knows they can't have children. And likewise, marrying a woman who has become infertile later in life. So again, we have a dispute. Similar to this, same as the dispute in our Mishnah. Loi Shaisa, this woman does not drink the Sotah waters if her husband warned her and she violated that warning. Reason? Because again, by Torah law, marriage is meant to produce children. So because Torah says this is the optimal marriage, therefore she doesn't qualify as a Sotah.
So what happens?
Sorry?
What happens in the case if it's a man who's married and his child is under 2 and his wife gets killed? Could he remarry? Because they're talking about protection for the child.
Good question. Very good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I don't.
We're always talking about protecting the child.
Yeah, good question. Very good question. I don't know the answer to the question, but my first gut is to say that Torah law would look at the presence of a woman/mother as more valuable than the presence of a father. Meaning to say, it might even be better for the child for the father to remarry quickly if you can find a woman that's okay with looking after another child. That's what my gut is saying. Whereas when it comes to a mother, if she now has to start becoming a wife and attending to her husband, who's not the father of the child, it'll distract her from taking care of the child. Yeah. This is my hunch. I don't know. This is my hunch. In this sense, like Torah definitely looks at the role of a mother in educating children as a much more central to a child's development than the father's involvement to a large degree. I'm not trying to ensconce myself in my relationship of my obligation to raise my children, God forbid. But nothing replaces a mother's love. It's just, we all know that. Just intuitively, we all know that.
Rabbi, sorry, if I may, what happened very often in very religious circles, that unfortunately, when a woman was killed, for example, during the war,
yeah.
and the sister was alive, the husband would marry the sister.
Yeah.
And that in religious families. And at the same time, for example, during the Spanish flu, when many Jewish women died, and they were very small children,
That's
the
right.
sister was married in very religious homes, even of rabbis
That's
in Eastern Europe.
I know families like that. That's absolutely right.
You're absolutely right, Rabbi.
That's absolutely right. Yes, that's correct. And I guess having a family member look after your children, an aunt, would have more of that familial love, motherly love than another woman. Yeah, these are very dicey situations, and I don't wish it upon anybody, God forbid. But you're right. In history, this is unfortunately a factor of our history. Yeah. I mean, okay, so back to our case here. The young man never had children, marries a woman who can't have children. She was capable of having children, but now can't. So view number one is that she doesn't drink the Sotah water because by Torah's expectation, their marriage isn't optimal, considering that to begin with, it was done in such a way where they can't produce children. And she doesn't take a ketubah. That's clear because she behaved in a way that's grounds for serious suspicion. He warned her against a certain person and she secluded herself. This is view number one. Rabbi Lezer says, Yachol Lisa Acheres. He can marry another woman. Again, by Torah law, polygamy is okay. Even though by rabbinic law today we don't, but by biblical law, polygamy is okay. And therefore, even though he cannot fulfill his obligation to have children with this woman, but that doesn't make this marriage a problem because he can, in theory, marry someone else, and have children from her and fulfill his obligation that way. And therefore there's no issue, so to speak, with their marriage, and therefore she just qualifies as such. Yeah, what do you want to say?
No, I guess it was an obvious statement, but it's kind of like it's not like it's a two-way street of polygamy. It's only polygamy for the man.
Other way is called something else.
Adultery?
No. There are cultures in which one woman will marry more than one guy, and it's called something else, not polygamy. It's called something else.
One woman can have an
There are such cultures out there in the world.
Okay.
And it's a strange kind of thing, but I mean, strange, whatever I might say,
Right.
but it exists and it's called something else. Not
Right.
polygamy, it's called something else. Can't remember what it's called.
Okay.
Another name for it. But I mentioned this before, and I should say it again. Rabbi Shachat, of blessed memory from Toronto, I remember listening to a lecture of his, Rabbi Emmanuel Shachat, and he was saying that even though Torah allows polygamy, but if you read the Torah narrative, it's like one long warning against polygamy, because every single polygamous relationship has issues in Torah, starting from Sarah, Avram marrying two women, one is sending the other away, to Yaakov and the sisters and the jealousies and whatnot, to King David. Every story that this in the Torah of more than one wife is almost like a cautionary tale. So he's arguing that Torah is saying, well, if you think you can handle it, like you can afford it, you can deal with it, go for it. But here's the warning: this is what you're getting into. In fact, in Talmudic literature, sister wives, meaning wives who share husband, are called tsaros. Tsaros, from the root word tsara, like stop giving me tsaros, stress. Their relationship is called tsaros.
Wow.
I don't know if it means that literally stresses, but it's certainly connected. Anyway, the bottom line is that here, in this case, even though he's married to someone that won't produce children, but in theory, the marriage is fine because he can marry someone else and have children. Okay.
Very interesting, Rabbi, because very often it's connoted and denoted that Shlomo HaMelech was distracted. Unfortunately, he could have done so much more. He did a tremendous amount, but he could have done so much more had he not been distracted.
In fact, the verse states that King Solomon worshipped idols, and it's not because he did, but because he allowed it through his wives, or didn't stop it, and his wives reintroduced idol worship into Israel. Yep. So certainly, there's a big cautionary tale against marrying more than one woman. I would make a joke now that handling one woman is hard enough, but of course I'm a rabbi, so I'm not going to make that joke. Okay. What? None of us heard the joke. Okay. Okay. So now, before we mentioned the case where there's an intended, man and woman intended, right? Either they're betrothed or he's intended to her because this is his deceased brother's wife. He warns her against secluding herself with a certain man. And the case before was she secluded herself before they actually closed their marriage. So the warning happened during the intended stage, and her violation of that warning when she secluded herself was also during that stage where they're not married. And that's when we said she cannot drink the Sotah water because she doesn't qualify as a full wife. Now, what happens? Avabat, Hamakana l'rosasai, one who warns his intended, Ulishaimedes Yavam Shalai, and warns his deceased brother's childless widow. So he warns her during the time when they're not fully married, but they are tangentially, not pronounced that word correctly, connected. They're betrothed, they're intended. But now she doesn't violate the warning right away, but rather they get married, and then Nistara, then she violates the warning. So what now? Right? The warning was issued when they weren't fully married, but then they got married, and now she violates the warning. So does violation of the warning after marriage qualify as a full Sotah, even though the warning was issued before the marriage? Right? Or, in other words, when Torah says that in order to qualify as a Sotah, you must be fully married, is that statement made only with respect to drinking the water in the temple? Or is that statement also made with respect to the warning? That is to say, only a warning that's issued after full marriage is valid. But if you issued a warning during engagement, and then the violation happened after marriage, maybe it doesn't qualify as a Sotah. So says our Tosefta, and this is something I think we discussed it once before. Oy shoisa, either she drinks the water, which means she could drink the water, even though the warning came before marriage, or if she decides to back out of drinking the water, which she has the right to do, but she forfeits the ketubah because she behaved in such a way that's got serious grounds for suspicion.
How can you go out with a woman?
Yeah.
And as you're going out with her, she's still free to do what she wants. You can't warn her.
Sorry?
If she's still free to do what she wants, she's not married. She's just going out with him.
No, but if you're engaged, we're talking about if you're betrothed.
Okay, if you're engaged, yeah.
There's a legal
But it's his fault.
because he went through with the marriage.
Yeah, he knew what he was in for.
Yeah, I suppose to some degree. It gets complicated. It's not so simple. Once people, when there's
Emotions involved.
when there's emotions involved, it gets very difficult. In the Orthodox world, where engagement is done in secrecy, so it's easier to separate if things don't go well. But once it's become public information that there's a relationship, it becomes so much more complicated. Especially once you have an engagement party, even never mind without the ring. Like today's engagements are not with the ring, right? We do the ring at the chuppah. We wrap up the betrothal and the wedding in one ceremony. But even so, when there's a public engagement, it becomes much more complicated to just say, okay, I'm out because therapy and this and that, try to work it out. So it's very difficult to blame anybody for sticking around even after there's a question or something.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult. Relationships are complicated and messy. They are not
Sure.
they're not as neat as we'd like to think them.
Yeah.
We'd want them to be. Okay, so now let's see. Sorry?
As you were saying, Rabbi, the sensitivity to the busha element, to the shame element.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
public embarrassment is a very big factor.
Yeah.
Very, very big factor.
This is all even before kids.
Yeah, it's before children. Yeah.
Oh, I don't
So
know, it's more
in
complicated.
Sorry?
in this case, that we just said, the Obama warning marriage violate.
So he violated after they closed the marriage.
So this is treating her as if she's just a married, same
Yep.
outcome as a.
Same outcome as a regular married woman.
couple.
Yes, even though the warning was issued before they were fully married.
Same scenario.
But because the violation of the warning was after they're fully married, she's treated as a regular Sotah, which means she can choose lose the ketubah or go through with drinking the water.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing in the next case. Muberes emonikas atzmai, a woman who is pregnant from her own husband, or she is weaning a child from her own husband, and during her pregnancy or during time when she was nursing, he warned her, she violated the warning. Again, it's a regular marriage, even though there happens to be a pregnancy or a baby here, and therefore either she drinks the Sotah water, or she forfeits the ketubah. That's a regular marriage. Likewise, Haroiva, a young bacher, Shanasa Akara, who marries a woman who cannot give birth because she has some condition later on in life that renders her infertile. Likewise, Zakena, a woman who's after menopause and therefore she's incapable of having children. But unlike the case before, where he had no other wife and had no children yet, and therefore there was a dispute, is this marriage okay? Because he can marry someone else and have children, or is this marriage not okay because it can't produce children? In this case, Yesh lo isha banim. He has another wife and has children, or maybe he has a previous wife and children. So he already fulfilled his obligation to reproduce. And now he's married to a woman because he likes her and she can't have children. So what? So again, no dispute. This is a regular marriage. And therefore, either she drinks the water, or she forfeits her ketubah. Okay. And we're almost getting to the point of what we're trying to get to the entire time. Eishes mamzer. La mamzer. A woman who is born of a legitimate relationship, but she's married to a person who is born of an illegitimate relationship, which means in theory, they shouldn't have gotten married. But again, once they're married is a halachically recognized marriage. Likewise, the Eishes nasin lanasin. Nasin, we mentioned this in the Mishnah, there's a certain group of people, the Divinim, that were banned from marrying into the Jewish people. And here's a woman who married such a person. Likewise, the Eishes ger, the wife of a convert, the Eved, Meshuchrer, or the wife of a slave who's now been freed, she's no longer a slave, the islandess, and a woman who is born infertile. Chavav Medalef, 26a. So now this is the key here, right? So a woman who's married to a person born of an illegitimate relationship, a woman married to someone coming from the Nasin, which means they shouldn't have been married to each other, but they are, and it's a recognized marriage halachically. No, I'm sorry, I have to rephrase that. It's not that she's born of a legitimate relationship and she's married to a guy who's born of an illegitimate relationship. It's someone who is allowed herself to marry someone of an illegitimate relationship. And likewise, a woman who, for whatever reason, is allowed to marry someone of descent from this group that wasn't supposed to marry Jewish people. There are certain instances where they're allowed to marry each other. And if that's the case, and likewise, a person marrying a convert, which of course is a fully legitimate marriage, and likewise, a woman marrying a slave who's been freed, again, a fully legitimate marriage, and likewise, someone married to an islandess, someone married to a woman who was born with being incapable of having children, born infertile. So says this Tosefta, they are all considered fully regular normal marriages, and therefore, either she drinks the Sotah water, or she loses her ketubah. So here we have our dispute. Here we have our refutation to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said that the dispute in our Mishnah, which this dispute is repeated in the Tosefta, the dispute was a woman married to someone who's infertile, or a man married to a woman who's infertile. Is that a legitimate relationship, and therefore she should be a ketubah Sotah? And why is it legitimate? Because if he wants to, he can marry someone else and have children. Or Torah says, no, they're supposed to have children. They can't have children. This is not a good marriage. And if it doesn't qualify as a Sotah, Rav Nachman said, the argument is only with respect to a woman who became infertile later in life. But if she was born infertile, she certainly doesn't qualify as a Sotah. That's what Rav Nachman said. And here we have the exact reverse. A woman born, an islandess, a woman born infertile, fully legitimate marriage, no problem, no issue, and she can qualify as a Sotah. So this is a direct refutation to Rav Nachman's position. And therefore, says the Mishnah, Katani Mia, we learned at the end of this whole discussion, islandess, we included on the list of regular, legitimate relationships in which she qualifies as a full-on Sotah, and therefore she can choose either to drink the water or lose the ketubah. On that list, we included a woman born infertile. And therefore, to Yufta de Rav Nachman, this becomes a refutation to Rav Nachman's position. This was the whole exercise of going through this elaborate discussion, which was interesting in and of itself, was really to get to this point. And God willing, tomorrow, we're going to try to substantiate Rav Nachman's position, and we're going to get to a deeper argument, a deeper discussion on the nature of the blessing, which is what you raised, Robert, the nature of the blessing that the Sotah water gives to the woman who's innocent. What's the nature of that blessing? And that's going to come to the bottom of it. Can a woman who knows she's infertile make herself into a Sotah, quote, misbehaving, so that she can get the blessing of having children later? Is that okay or not? And that's going to come to the discussion tomorrow. And that's going to help us frame the dispute between Rav Nachman and this questioner. As I mentioned before, because of the phrasing of the Gemara where it says Meitvei, I know that the questioner has an agenda, which means the questioner is not just asking a question of Nachman, hoping for a response. He's actually stating a position, which means we have a dispute here. We have one sage who says, Rav Nachman, who says, a woman born infertile does not qualify as a Sotah, and another sage who says, citing to this Tosefta, no, a woman born infertile, no dispute, definitely qualifies as a Sotah. The exact opposite opinion. And then the dispute of our Mishnah, which is the dispute of the earlier generation, that's only in a case where she becomes infertile later in life. So God willing, the next layer of this dispute coming tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm getting lost in the forest kind of thing.
Okay.
Just thinking about if a woman violates a warning.
Yeah.
And she drinks and she's found innocent. What happens with her ketubah? Because that initial violation precluded her from the ketubah.
Yeah.
And
So after she,
like the Sotah drinking proven innocent would reinstate her ketubah.
that's what.
But there's also there's a difference between contractual bargaining between the parties, and then there's Hashem's.
Right.
So I don't.
Right.
So
Hashem's. That's right. Hashem's. That's right. So if she goes through drinking the water, she retains.
She reinstates.
I guess you can say reinstate instead of. She reinstates her claim to the ketubah. Yeah. Well, actually, according to Beis Hillel, according to Beis Shammai was never lost. According to Beis Hillel, she reinstates. Remember we discussed that yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess according to Beis Hillel, right? With Beis Hillel, it gets reinstated. Yeah, according to Beis Hillel, it's reinstated. According to Beis Shammai, it's maintained. She never lost it. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. And tomorrow, God willing, substantiate Rav Nachman's view and get to a deeper discussion in the nature of the blessing that the Sotah water brings to the one who is innocent. Wonderful.
Rabbi. God bless you. God bless you all.
Good day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. God bless you.